She walked into the wrong hotel room at midnight, and the man sitting in the dark said just 4 words that changed everything. He said, "I've been waiting for you." Her name was Nora Calloway. 31 years old. Emergency room nurse from Nashville, Tennessee. She wasn't supposed to be in Chicago at all. Her flight to Portland had been diverted due to a severe storm over the Midwest, and United Airlines had done what United Airlines always does, handed her a printed voucher, a lukewarm apology, and a room key to a hotel she'd never heard of. The Alderton Grand. 42 floors of polished marble and quiet money. Nora had dragged her roller bag through the lobby, eyes half closed from a double shift she'd worked before catching her flight. She rode the elevator to the 19th floor, slid her key card into room 1914, and pushed the door open. The room was dark except for one lamp in the corner. A man sat in the armchair beneath it, dressed in a charcoal suit, watching the door like he already knew someone was coming through it. When their eyes met, he didn't flinch. He didn't reach for a phone. He didn't shout. He simply said, in a voice as calm as still water, "I've been waiting for you." Nora's hand found the door frame. Her heart found her throat. And her brain, the rational, clinical brain of a woman who'd seen blood and crisis and chaos every day for 8 years, told her to run. But her feet didn't move. His name, she would learn later, was Ethan Cole. 40 years old. Former intelligence contractor turned private security consultant. Born in Savannah, Georgia. Raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs and still found time to read to him every night. He was not supposed to be in Chicago either. 3 days earlier, Ethan had received a call from an old colleague, a woman named Priya Singh who worked for a federal oversight task force. She had uncovered something. Something that connected 4 separate deaths in 3 different cities. All ruled accidental. All involving people who had worked, at some point, for the same pharmaceutical company, a corporation called Vantara Biomedical. Priya had told Ethan to meet her. Room 1914, the Alderton Grand. Tuesday at midnight. He had been sitting in that chair for 40 minutes. The woman who walked through the door was not Priya Singh. But the moment Nora Calloway stepped into that lamplight, her dark hair pinned back unevenly, her scrub still faintly smelling of antiseptic, her eyes wide and terrified and unmistakably alive, Ethan felt something in his chest he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt aware. Like someone had reached into a room full of noise and suddenly turned all of it off. "You're in the wrong room," Ethan said quietly, correcting himself before she could scream. "This is 1914, Nora said, her voice steadier than she felt. She held up the key card like evidence. Ethan looked at it. Then looked at the key card on the table beside him, identical in every way except for a small handwritten note slipped beneath it. A note in Priya's handwriting. "Don't trust the front desk. They know." He made a decision in the space of one breath. He would not tell Nora the truth. Not yet. Not until he understood how she fit into any of this. "Hotel must have double assigned the room," he said evenly. "Happens all the time. I'll call down and get it sorted." Nora crossed her arms. She had worked 100 overnight shifts. She had sat across from patients who lied to her about how they'd gotten hurt. She knew what it looked like when someone was managing information instead of sharing it. "You were sitting in the dark," she said. "I like the dark. With your shoes on. At midnight." A pause. "I'm a light sleeper," Ethan offered. Nora stared at him for a long moment. Then, to his complete surprise, she set her roller bag against the wall, sat down on the edge of the bed, and said, "Whatever's going on, you might as well tell me. Because my flight doesn't leave until 6 a.m., I'm too tired to find another room, and I've been lied to by better liars than you." Ethan blinked. That was the moment, though neither of them could have named it then, that something between them shifted. They talked until 2 in the morning. Not about the truth, not fully. But about the edges of it. Ethan told her he was in Chicago for work. Nora told him she was headed to Portland for her brother's wedding. He asked what kind of nurse she was. She told him ER. So you're used to people in crisis, he said. I'm used to people pretending they're not in crisis, she corrected. He smiled. It was a small smile, crooked on the left side, and it made him look younger than 40. It made him look like someone who had once been easy to love. You're perceptive, he said. It's not a skill, Nora replied. It's just paying attention. Most people are too busy thinking about what they're going to say next to actually hear what someone's telling them. Ethan studied her. In 17 years of fieldwork, he had learned to assess a person's trustworthiness in under 90 seconds. Nora Calloway was trustworthy. She was also, without trying to be, the most genuine person he'd been in a room with in years. But there was something else. Something he couldn't rationalize away. She looked almost exactly like a photograph Priya had sent him 6 months ago. A photograph that had nothing to do with Chicago. A photograph of a woman connected to Vantara Biomedical's earliest clinical trials that had been run in Nashville, Tennessee. 17 years ago. Ethan said nothing. But his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. And Nora, because she paid attention, noticed. At 2:17 a.m., Ethan's phone buzzed. A single text from an unknown number. 3 words. She found it. His blood ran cold. He excused himself to the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at the screen. Priya had found something significant enough to trigger whoever was watching her. The fact that she hadn't arrived at room 1914 meant one of 2 things. She had been stopped. Or she had run. Either way, this hotel was no longer safe. He splashed cold water on his face and looked at himself in the mirror. 40 years old. Carrying the weight of decisions that had cost other people more than they'd cost him. He had promised himself, after the last job, that he was done. That he was going to buy a small house somewhere with trees. Maybe learn to fish. Maybe stop sleeping with his shoes on. He came back into the room. Nora had taken the second pillow from the bed and placed it firmly on her side, establishing a boundary with the quiet confidence of a woman who had shared an ER break room with 12 other people and knew exactly how to claim her space. She looked up at him. You just remembered something that scared you, she said. Not a question. He sat back down in the armchair. I need to ask you something, he said. And I need you to answer honestly. I'm a nurse, Nora said. Honesty is my default setting. Have you ever heard of Vantara Biomedical? The color left Nora Calloway's face. She knew that name. She had been trying to forget it for 8 years. When Nora was 23, fresh out of nursing school and desperate for money, she had enrolled in a paid clinical trial run by a company called Vantara Biomedical. It had seemed routine. A new compound designed to reduce inflammation markers in young adults. 4 weeks of monitoring. $1,200. She had signed 22 pages of documents she had barely read. 2 weeks in, she developed symptoms no one could explain. Migraine so severe she lost vision in her left eye for 3 days. A tremor in her right hand that lasted 6 weeks after the trial ended. When she reported it, she was told it was stress. When she pushed back, she was quietly paid a settlement and asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement. She was 23. She signed it. She needed the rent money. She had never told anyone. Not her parents. Not her colleagues. Not even her brother, whose wedding she was flying to Portland to attend. She had buried it under 8 years of long shifts and good work and forward motion. And now a stranger in a Chicago hotel room, a stranger she had met 40 minutes ago, Was saying that name like it was the most dangerous word in the English language. "How do you know that name?" she whispered. "How do you know that name?" Ethan asked quietly. The silence between them was the loudest thing in the room. She told him. All of it. Every detail she had sealed behind 8 years of silence. She told him about the trial. About the symptoms. About the settlement. About the NDA. About the tremor in her hand that came back every winter when the temperature dropped below 20 degrees. She told him the way she told patients hard truths, clearly, without dramatizing, watching his face for the reaction that would tell her whether she had made a mistake. Ethan listened without interrupting. And when she finished, he leaned forward and put his elbows on his knees and looked at her with an expression she had never seen on a man's face before. It was not pity. It was not discomfort. It was fury. Quiet, contained, absolute fury, the kind that belongs to someone who has just confirmed the worst thing they suspected. "You're the 47th, he said. Nora stared. What? 47 people enrolled in that trial across 4 cities. Most of them signed NDAs just like you. Most of them moved on with their lives just like you." His voice was measured, but underneath it was something raw. 4 of them are dead, Nora. The 4 who started asking questions. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Priya," he started. "Who is Priya?" Nora asked. "She was supposed to be in this room tonight. She was the one who found the connection between the 4 deaths and the trial." Was. Nora caught the past tense before he did. "She's missing," she said quietly. Not a question. Ethan nodded. At 3 a.m., Ethan's contact, a man named Garrett who worked as a freelance investigator out of Washington, D.C., called with a location. Priya was alive. She had panicked when she realized she was being followed, abandoned the hotel plan, and gone to a 24-hour diner 4 blocks away. She had been sitting in a corner booth for 2 hours, sending coded messages to people she trusted and eating the same slice of apple pie on repeat because she didn't know what else to do. Ethan exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. "We need to go get her," he said. "We?" Nora repeated. He looked at her steadily. "You're part of this now whether you wanted to be or not. Whoever is monitoring this situation knows this room was accessed tonight. Staying here isn't safe." Nora looked at her roller bag. She thought about the wedding in Portland. About her brother's face at the altar. About the toast she had written on the plane, on a cocktail napkin, in her terrible handwriting. She thought about 22 pages she had signed at 23 years old. About the tremor in her hand. About 47 people who had been told their symptoms were stress. About 4 of them who were dead for asking questions. She stood up. She grabbed her bag. "I'm a nurse," she said, moving toward the door. "If your contact is sitting in a diner having a breakdown over apple pie, she probably needs one." Ethan grabbed his jacket. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't walk out of a room alone. The diner smelled like coffee and fryer oil and the particular comfort of places that never close. Priya Singh was exactly where Garrett said she'd be, corner booth, window seat, a plate of half-eaten apple pie and a laptop open to a spreadsheet that made Nora's eyes go wide the moment she saw it. Names. Dates. Dosage levels. Adverse event reports. All suppressed. All buried inside a subsidiary company that Vantara had dissolved in 2009. "I got into their archived clinical server 3 weeks ago," Priya said, her voice hoarse from hours of silence. What they ran wasn't a standard trial. It was a data harvesting operation. They weren't testing for inflammation. They were testing for a specific genetic marker, one that predicts neurological deterioration in adults under 40. Nora felt the tremor start in her right hand. "They weren't trying to treat anything," Priya continued. They were identifying a population. Cataloging people who carry a gene that makes them candidates for a second compound, one they're preparing to bring to market next year. A compound that only works if you've been pre-exposed to the first one. The silence at the table was total. They tagged us, Nora said slowly. Like cattle, Priya confirmed, her eyes filling. And the 4 people who died, they were all participants who had retained a genetic attorney to challenge the NDA. All 4 died of causes that looked natural but weren't. Ethan had already thought this through on the 4-block walk to the diner. He pulled out a hard drive, encrypted, air-gapped, and connected it to Priya's laptop. Everything goes on here. 3 copies. 1 to Garrett. 1 to a journalist at the Washington Post I've used before. 1 to a federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York who has been building a corporate misconduct case for 2 years and has been looking for exactly this kind of anchor evidence. You had this planned, Nora said. I had a contingency planned, he corrected. There's a difference. Within 40 minutes, the files were distributed. Within the hour, Garrett confirmed receipt. By 4:30 a.m., an encrypted drive was in the hands of a journalist who had been waiting her entire career for a story this clean. The full picture, now that Priya could tell it without looking over her shoulder, was more staggering than Ethan had expected. Vantara Biomedical had run 6 separate trials over 8 years. All disguised as standard pharmaceutical research. All targeting young adults in financial need, the kind who needed $1,200 enough to sign 22 pages without reading them. The compound they were developing, the one set for market release the following spring, was projected to generate $40 billion in its first decade. It would only be effective in people pre-exposed to the first trial compound. Which meant Vantara had spent 8 years quietly building its own guaranteed customer base. 47 people in this trial alone. Hundreds more across the others. People who didn't know they had been chosen. People who had been tagged. Priya was alive. Shaken, exhausted, and running on diner coffee and adrenaline, but alive. As for whether they were targets, the answer, Ethan explained on the walk back to retrieve his car, was yes and no. They target people who move legally, he said. NDAs, attorneys, court challenges. That's the threat profile they respond to. What they don't have a playbook for is a distributed media and federal drop. That's not a lawsuit. That's a flood. You can't threaten your way out of a flood. Nora walked beside him, her bag on her shoulder, the winter Chicago air sharp in her lungs. So we're safe, she said. You're safer, Ethan said. There's a difference. She nodded. You say that a lot. There's a difference. Most important things have differences that people don't bother to notice. She looked at him sideways. You paid attention in school, she said. I paid attention everywhere else, he replied. She had. And it had not broken her. That was the thing about trust that Nora had forgotten somewhere in the years of 12-hour shifts and patients who lied about how they got hurt and a pharmaceutical company that told her symptoms were stress. Trust didn't require certainty. It only required a decision. She had made it. Sitting on the edge of a hotel bed she wasn't supposed to be in, across from a man she wasn't supposed to meet, in a city she wasn't supposed to land in. She had decided to tell the truth. And the truth had become the one thing keeping them all safe. Because it was the name she had spent 8 years burying. The name attached to the 22 pages. To the settlement. To the tremor. To the part of herself she had decided was better forgotten. But here was what Nora understood, standing in a 24-hour diner at 4 in the morning with a stranger who had warm eyes and wore his shoes while he slept. You don't actually bury things. You just carry them in different pockets. She hadn't known the full extent of it. She hadn't known she was one of 47. She hadn't known her blood work had been tagged or that somewhere in a corporate server in New Jersey there was a file with her name on it labeled, Candidate. Stage 2. But she knew now. And knowing, fully, completely, without the comfortable haze of almost forgetting, was not as crushing as she'd feared. It was clarifying. The front desk clerk at the Alderton Grand, a man named Dennis Hale, age 26, had been receiving monthly payments from a Vantera subsidiary in exchange for flagging any reservation made under a specific list of names. Priya's name was on that list. Which was why she had written the warning. Which was why she had never made it to room 1914. Dennis Hale, by 8 a.m. the following morning, would be the subject of a federal inquiry. He had not known what Vantera was. He had only known the payments. $1,200 a month. The same amount they'd paid the trial participants. Ethan noted the symmetry without comment. Priya had chosen room 1914 because the number was a code, a reference to a case file she and Ethan had worked together 4 years earlier. Something only he would recognize. Something that would tell him, this is real. Come ready. She hadn't been stopped. She had been smart. She had seen the tail outside the hotel, turned around before entering, and made the call to disappear into plain sight, the oldest intelligence trick in the book. A corner booth. A window with a view of the street. Apple pie, because she hadn't eaten in 9 hours and crisis does not pause for meals. She had asked herself that question, too. Standing in that doorway. A stranger in a dark room. Every rational signal in her body pointing toward the hallway. But here is what she told Ethan, 3 days later, when they were sitting in the back of a car on the way to the federal building and the case was already beginning to move. You didn't look at me like I was a problem, she said. Everyone in that situation looks at the other person like they're a problem to be managed. You looked at me like I was a person. Ethan turned to look at her. You were, he said simply. She had learned, somewhere in 8 years of emergency nursing, to trust the things that couldn't be explained, the patient who came in fine but whose eyes told a different story, the moment in a room when the air changed quality, the quiet certainty that something mattered. That was what had held her in the doorway. Quiet certainty. He had not been waiting for her. He had been waiting for someone else entirely. But life, the real, unscripted, diverted flight kind of life, does not always send you the person you were expecting. Sometimes it sends you the person you needed without giving you the option to say no. Ethan Cole had been waiting in a dark room for a colleague. Instead, he got a woman in worn-out scrubs with a roller bag and a tremor in her right hand and the most direct pair of eyes he had ever looked into. A woman who paid attention. Who said hard things plainly. Who had carried a secret for 8 years not because she was weak, but because she had been 23 and alone and needed rent money, and no one, not one person, had told her that she mattered enough to fight back. He had spent 17 years working for the truth in other people's lives. He had never expected to find something worth fighting for in his own. The story broke on a Tuesday. Front page of the Washington Post. Above the fold. Pharmaceutical giant Vantera Biomedical faces federal investigation over alleged deceptive clinical trials spanning 8 years. By Thursday, the CEO had resigned. By the following Monday, 3 senior executives had been indicted. The second compound, the one slated for spring release, was pulled from development. 47 people received certified letters from the Department of Justice explaining that their NDAs had been voided. That their medical records were being reviewed. That they were, at last, being seen. Nora got her letter on a Friday. She read it 3 times in her break room at the hospital, a cup of coffee going cold beside her. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she had saved under a name that would have seemed absurd 6 months ago. Man in the dark, did you get it? She typed back, I got it. A pause. You okay? She looked at her right hand. Still. No tremor. Yeah, she typed. I think I finally am. Another pause. Then, Portland next weekend? Your brother wants to meet me. Apparently you told him there's a man who sleeps with his shoes on and he has questions. Nora laughed out loud in the break room, startling two residents who looked up from their charts. She typed back, he's going to give you a hard time. I know, Ethan replied. I've been waiting for it. She walked into the wrong room at midnight. And it turned out to be exactly the right one.